For 67 years, the world was fed a very specific story about the 9 experienced hikers who perished at Dyatlov Pass. We were told they were killed by an unknown compelling force. And that was the official line. It was exactly the version the Soviet state desperately wanted everyone to believe. But in 2025, a rare window finally opened into the declassified KGB files. We're talking about documents that were locked away in private archives, buried deep in Sverdlovsk vaults, and deliberately scrubbed of their most damning pages. So welcome to The Explainer. Tonight, we aren't just spinning wild theories, we're actually looking at the ink on the paper. We're doing a rigorous, line-by-line audit of the exact reports the KGB tried to bury, from hidden radiation labs right down to the infiltration of the hiking group itself. It is time to uncover what really happened on the slopes of Dead Mountain.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Look, if we're going to get to the actual truth, we need to immediately toss out the myths. Forget the sensational tabloid stories about Yetis, and honestly, forget the highly convenient 2020 state-sponsored ruling that just neatly blamed an avalanche. Our focus today is purely on a forensic investigation into a very real 1959 Cold War cover-up. We are going to look strictly at the undeniable facts and the newly unsealed documents that prove, without a doubt, this wasn't just some tragic camping accident.
Let's start with the document that officially shut this whole thing down. On May 28, 1959, lead prosecutor Lev Ivanov signed off on a termination decree containing this exact, bizarre phrase. Now, I really want you to analyze that line with me for a second. In a Soviet legal system that was literally obsessed with precision, absolute accountability, and assigning blame, compelling force is just incredibly vague. It's essentially a legal placeholder for none of your business. Declassified notes now reveal that Ivanov was under extreme pressure from high-ranking regional officials to write this, specifically to dismiss reports of flying orange spheres seen by witnesses that night. And why? Well, because the search and recovery mission had been heavily infiltrated by the KGB from day one.
Now, you really have to look at the timeline here, because the speed of this is wildly suspicious. The hiker's tent and the first bodies were discovered in late February. By March, officials were already pushing through rushed, highly incomplete autopsies in a small Soviet morgue. And then, bam, by May, the entire investigation was abruptly closed, stamped top secret, and locked away in the Sverdlovsk archives. You kind of have to ask yourself, how on earth does a case with such bizarre, inexplicable physical evidence get completely wrapped up in just 3 months and immediately suppressed from the public?
Now, what's really fascinating and honestly terrifying about the Ravine 4 is the sheer physical impossibility of their injuries. 4 of the hikers were found down in a ravine under several feet of snow. The autopsy showed crushed chests, ribs that were snapped like twigs, severe skull fractures, and, in the case of Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryev, missing eyes and a missing tongue. But here is the critical detail you can't ignore. They had absolutely zero external soft tissue damage. None. No scrapes, no bruising on the skin to match the devastating internal carnage. Think about it. A natural disaster, like a snow slab avalanche, simply does not violently crush your internal organs while leaving your skin completely untouched.
The original medical examiner actually noted that the sheer force required to do that kind of internal damage was comparable to a high-speed car crash. In modern forensic terms, this is what's known as a kinetic shockwave signature. It is the exact calling card of an airburst weapon, like a parachute mine, detonating just above the ground. And sure enough, as declassified records now show, the Soviet military was actively conducting secret tests of exactly these kinds of weapons in the broader Ural region at that exact time.
But hold on, because the weapons testing theory, that's really only one piece of this puzzle. We have to talk about this number, 9,900. When the investigators ran dosimetric tests on the victims, they detected traces of beta radiation reaching up to 9,900 counts per minute on the hiker's clothing. This brings us directly to document 411 in the files, a massive radiation anomaly that completely shatters the official conventional narrative.
Now, the standard explanation usually tries to brush this off by pointing to background radiation from the 1957 Kashtim nuclear disaster. But look closer at the actual lab analysis. The radiation wasn't uniform across the camp, and it wasn't spread evenly over all the hikers. It was highly concentrated on specific garments, specifically Lyudmila Dubinina's brown sweater and Semyon Zolotaryev's pants. A natural snow event just doesn't leave targeted high-level beta radiation on 2 very specific pieces of clothing.
This localized radiation actually points directly to a fascinating concept found in the declassified intelligence analysis. In espionage circles, it's referred to as a controlled delivery. This theory completely reframes the entire hiking trip. It suggests the group, or at least certain members of it, were actually part of a covert Cold War counterintelligence sting operation. They were allegedly sent out to deliver this deliberately contaminated clothing to Western spies operating in the Urals, basically providing a radioactive fingerprint to track where Soviet nuclear materials were leaking. So this wasn't just a university camping trip, it was a high-stakes undercover operation.
Which naturally brings us to what might be the single biggest question of this entire explainer. Who exactly was Semyon Zolotaryov? Because if there really was a KGB sting operation happening on that mountain, you're going to need a trained operative to run it.
And this brilliantly illustrates the glaring anomaly in the group's enrollment records. You've got the expedition leader, Igor Dyatlov, right? He's a 23-year-old radio engineering student. The rest of the group are all in their early 20s, fellow students, recent grads. And then you have Semyon Zolotaryov. He was a 38-year-old, decorated World War II veteran, complete with mysterious military tattoos, and he was a very late addition to this tight-knit group of 20-somethings. Based on declassified files and modern historical analysis, there is a very strong suspicion that he was a government plant, inserted at the last minute to supervise a highly sensitive mission.
To add a whole other layer of suspicion, consider how Zolotaryov was actually found in that ravine months later. Despite fleeing the tent in absolute terror, he was found with a camera securely strapped around his neck and a notepad tightly gripped in his hand. He was actively trying to record something out there in the freezing dark. But the film from that specific camera, well, the official files conveniently claim it was destroyed by water damage. Yet, secondary reports strongly indicate that the film was confiscated by the KGB right at the morgue and deliberately scrubbed from the official record forever.
And it turns out that missing film is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to redactions. When the archives were finally unsealed in the 1990s, researchers doing a line-by-line analysis immediately spotted obvious page numbering gaps. Entire sections where radiation reports and crucial witness testimonies should be were just gone. And what were those witnesses saying? Multiple locals up to 50 kilometers away reported seeing these glowing orange spheres moving through the night sky on the exact date the hikers died. Visual reports that perfectly match the exhaust signatures of Soviet rockets or experimental weapons.
So the crucial point here is a stunning deathbed admission from lead prosecutor Lev Ivanov himself. Years later, he confessed that his investigation had indeed gathered these exact reports of fireballs in the sky, but high-ranking state officials explicitly ordered him to, quote, zip it. The report the KGB wanted so desperately to bury wasn't just about how these hikers died. It was fundamentally about what they saw. If they witnessed a failed rocket launch or a botched experimental weapons test, those 9 citizens instantly became a massive liability that had to be neutralized.
Let's move on and see how this all builds into a terrifyingly logical cascade of events. Step 1, a secret military test, maybe an airburst parachute mine, maybe a rocket, goes wrong right over the mountain. Step 2, the sheer kinetic shockwave and blinding lights violently disorient the hikers, causing them to slash their way out of their tent and flee in absolute panic into a negative 30-degree night. Step 3, the state quickly realizes what happened, and the KGB immediately infiltrates the search party to control the narrative. And finally, Step 4, the horrific physical evidence is buried, the files are highly classified, and a completely nonsensical compelling force decree is issued just to neutralize any liability for the Soviet state.
When you stack the modern 2020 state narrative right up against this 2025 declassified truth, the official story just completely crumbles. The Russian government still wants to close the book by calling it a slab avalanche. But as we've seen today, a small slide of snow simply cannot account for targeted radioactive clothing, internal injuries mirroring a high-speed car crash without a single external scratch, and the incredibly aggressive, paranoid suppression of evidence by a Cold War superpower. These hikers weren't hunted by mythical creatures, and they weren't just the unlucky victims of a random snowstorm. They were caught right in the crosshairs of a military-industrial complex that valued absolute secrecy way above human life. They were driven from their tent into a freezing night where they were hunted not by Yetis, but by a state secret. Which leaves us with one final, incredibly chilling thought to take away today. If the state was willing to orchestrate such a massive cover-up, literally burying 9 of its own young citizens to protect a Cold War secret back in 1959, what else is still locked inside those unsealed archives today?